Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Unreal, a show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I am your host, Dan Hutnick, and today I am joined by our wonderful guest, Philipp Brasin, to talk about evolving localization workflows within UE5 with custom tooling. How are you doing, Philipp?
I'm doing great. Hey, everyone.
Why don't you go ahead and let people know who you are? A little background on you.
Yeah, I'm Philip. I've spent the roughly past 9 years working with Unreal Engine. I've done a bunch of gameplay programming and then moved into tool development. And along the way, I've explored different areas of Unreal, including like procedural generation with Unreal and VR stuff and non-game projects. And currently, I'm working on extending and maintaining the custom version of Unreal 5 we have here at Aesir. And Aesir has like 115 employees at the moment, roughly. And we're working on multiple different projects in parallel. And that's why we try to put quite some effort into sharing our tools between the projects and move towards our ideal work mode.
Yeah, absolutely. And having some like consistent pipeline and tools between those different projects is really nice, and especially having somebody like you who can kind of be like that centralized point to kind of correlate between those things is super awesome and super helpful on a project. And there's been countless projects where I wish I would have had somebody like you involved for
Yeah.
sure. So. Yeah, let's jump in. Obviously, we have the title here, but what does that mean? What is evolving localization workflows in UE5 mean for you and for the team at Acer?
Well, yeah, we've used the localization system how it was in native Unreal for a bunch of projects. And of course, we had like some smaller side scripts or something that do elements of the process to make those easier. But we've never had like a holistic system, let's say, that takes care of all of it. And we've had a bunch of issues with localization, and we just were fed up with it and then decided to make a one-fits-all solution for all of our projects, basically.
That's super cool. That's super cool. Well, I'm super excited to jump into it. I know you have a lot to cover here. Before we do jump in, though, if anybody has questions throughout the show that they would like to toss to Philip with regards to the topic at hand, please put them in brackets question in brackets, and then follow that question. Or follow that with your question. Excuse me. We'll put a sample of that in the chat here so you can kind of see how that would look. But put those questions in the chat. We'll be gathering as many of them as we can as the session as the session goes, and then we will toss them to Philip towards the end of the session. Please keep it topic relevant, right? We're here to talk about localization with Philip and the team here. If you have any general things with Unreal, any questions with Unreal, the Unreal ecosystem, anything like that, please head on over to the Epic developer community where we have our forums, we have documentations, and plenty of resources that can hopefully answer any of these questions that you might have. But with that, Philip, are we ready to jump in? Was there anything else we wanted to say before we hop in?
Well, maybe one small thing. On the slides, there's going to be some QR codes that you can scan for some engine modifications that we've made and that I thought might be useful to you. Those are mostly for GitHub pull requests that I've created. So those feel free to scan. There's also going to be a resources slide at the end, at the very end of the presentation, that you can have an overview of all of them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump in. I'm excited.
Yeah, let's get into it. Right. Like I said, I want to show you how we extended the localization system in Unreal. But before that, I want to describe a situation that maybe some of you know, and the familiarity might be there. So just imagine a new project starts, and then the team is obviously excited about it, and people are building features and iterating on systems and starting to create content. And the text localization in general is something that often is left behind a little bit, and people, maybe they check the little checkbox to localize a text, or at most use some string tables, but often it doesn't go much further than that. But then later in the project, someone says, hey, we should start doing locarounds to get this game out of the door soon. Yeah, but then by that point, the texts are already like scattered everywhere. They're hard coded in blueprints or randomly in some string tables that are scattered across the features, and there's data assets that may or may not still be in use. Or there's code, there's texts as in the code in C++, where only the coders can really find them. So then there's also probably a bunch of duplicates, right? Yeah, so there's no overview, there's no context of what the texts mean, and there's no single place where you can really look and say, yeah, this is the state of our localization. And yeah, now then someone must take time and wrangle it all under control. Yeah,
Which can become a lot, right? The later in the
yes.
project that is, right? Like, so
yeah. We've had situations where it's like a couple of days before release, and then suddenly someone notices that something is very wrong with something that's localized, or something is not localized, and it's also very stressful in an already stressful time. Yeah, so it's a terrible position to be in.
And it's an important thing to consider too, right? Because like there obviously, as we're going to get in here, there is a fair amount of work that goes with it, but it really kind of broadens the amount of people that can enjoy your experience and participate. The more you can localize for different groups.
Absolutely, yeah. And so because we were in that position, we looked into the tools that are available to us, like obviously the Loca dashboard that ships with Unreal, and various community plugins, and also our own scripts, but none of them really were quite enough to fix all of the issues that we were having. So we needed something that is like one place where all of the rules and the restrictions of the localization stuff live together with the data, and a central system that reduces the very wide failure space into a smaller point, and that can enforce the important rules so that the developers don't have to think about them that much. Yeah, and especially for Loca, you can find a lot of community stuff out there, so that also shows that we're not the only ones that have this need of changing something in the Loca system or extending it. Yeah, so the goal here is that you maybe get some inspiration and find some easy improvements that you can take with you into your own projects. Okay, let me tell you about what we were setting out to do. So the first thing we wanted is a single source of truth, meaning all of the localized content, all of the texts, including the translations and whatever metadata we wanted, are living in files that are human readable and version controlled. So there's no more gathering step in our system, and we also don't have any string table assets that need to be maintained by developers. Or it's all just a text, and once you created a text, you're done. The rest happens in, like, obviously they need to be translated later, but you don't need to do anything else. Second is that we wanted to streamline the workflows a bit more. So adding a text should be like a 30-second task at most, and not a multi-step process involving multiple assets or something like that. And if the task is too complex to set up like a proper text that is localizable, people will just likely end up creating the mess that I described earlier. Third is game feature support. We use the game feature system a lot, and we want the game features to own their localization data. So we can then also potentially share them with other projects. Just imagine like a settings menu that like every game needs a settings menu, and that you can implement as a game feature and then give it to another project so they have a good starting point and don't need to do it from scratch. Yeah, and the default localization system in Unreal does obviously support game features, but it compiles everything into locres files, and those are not loaded or unloaded dynamically. They are just, the local is just always there, and we wanted it to have that support of dynamic loading and unloading, especially because we also plan to use game features for modding. And lastly, we want extensibility, of course. And we already knew we need to localize more than just UI texts. We have a voice line system with speakers and recording directions and other metadata. So we wanted to plan the system in a way that supports both of these, so we can have one central place where we edit all of our localized data. Also, we decided to ignore localized assets for now, because we didn't really encounter that many problems with them. And yeah, so our changes are only regarding text localization. Yeah, so for anyone who's not super familiar how the local system works or how the data flows, is I explain it here. You start with the f-texts in assets and code, of course, and then you gather them via the dashboard, or the commandlet itself, and then that is then the texts are then compiled to these locres files that are already mentioned, which are then, when you start your build, loaded into the text localization manager, and that the UI uses to display the text. So the section on the right here is mostly unchanged. We did some smaller engine mods to support some things, but it's mostly the same, and our changes primarily focus on the left part of how the data is managed and then fed into the engine for it to consume. So we didn't abandon string tables or f-texts, or the locres files also still exist. All that still is there, and it's a great base for us to use. We just basically changed to UX to something else. Another important principle that we had was that we wanted everything to run inside the editor. So there's no external tooling. It's all C++ and Slate. And any tech person on our teams can then easily look into it, read it, and maintain it. We're not depending on any external, like Excel macros or whatever third-party tools that might throw a wrench into our system. Yeah. Also, this whole thing is still a little work in progress, or it's still very much work in progress, actually. It's always improving. And right now there's still some cases where our writers use Excel for like bulk editing stuff because it's just easier at the moment. But even then, we make sure that we route the data back through our editor first before we then write it to disk, or it gets into the game. So we still have our validation that looks into the data that happens in editor. And the editor is always in the loop and holds the state that counts, basically. Yeah. Right. So with that context established, I'll show you how it actually looks like. And we'll start from the perspective of a UI developer. So just imagine you're building a new menu and you need a localized text for a button or something. And in the usual Unreal workflow, you'd first create the texts and then maybe a string table. And eventually then someone or something gathers it, and then the local system knows about your texts. With our system, it all happens inside UMG. And so we're just adding the text And this right here is a new widget that we added. It replaces the native Unreal widget. And you can select the namespace and the key of the existing texts in the system. And you can also search for something if you happen to know the namespace or the key. And then it shows you the context right here in the widget of the text. And it also shows you the text itself, obviously. I'll just wait a second for the video to catch up. Yeah, all right. But then what happens if the text isn't actually in the system yet and we want to add a new text? So for that, the widget has this add new button, and we can just enter a new namespace and a new key, and then give it a context, create the text, and then we will be able to have a new entry in the system, and that's all you have to do to make it work. And it's reasonably quick. And let's just wait for the video to catch up again. I'm typing awfully slow.
It seems like a fairly intuitive tool, though.
Yeah, now all you do is save it. It shows up in the widget, of course. And when we compile it and then switch back to Pi, you will see that the text is right there, and it's completely ready to be localized. There's nothing else needs to happen. Also, a quick note on that widget that you saw is it's one of the first things that we've built, and it needs more improvements. It needs a redesign, basically, especially because the search and filtering capabilities are not up to the standards that I would like to have by now. But it's already a significant improvement because we don't have to leave the UMG asset anymore. Right. So now let's take a look at what actually happened on disk when we did that. We can see the changes here, and it's a couple files. It's 4 locres files that have already been compiled for the new text. It's for the 4 different languages. In this case, I have German, English, Spanish, and French. And we'll take a look at the JSON files, which is then the actual source data for all of the texts. Yeah, as you can see, that is the file, and the new entry we just added. It has the key, and the namespace is encoded in the file name. And it has the context and the hello world that I gave it, and it also has tags that we support in the system. And the German version of the text, okay, sorry, let me quickly go back here. Yeah, the German version of the text has no text, obviously, because we haven't provided any translations yet. That will be filled out once the translators get to do their job. Yeah, and that's all you have to do as a content creator for creating new widgets. So awesome. The next step is from the perspective of a writer who does not work with the UMG assets or anything, but they are working directly in a custom editor that we've created, and that looks like this. And I know it's a bit overwhelming, probably. So here on the right, you'll see all the different texts with the keys and the context and the English version and all the different languages on the right. And they are organized hierarchically. So the namespace is right here, and then there's 2 more layers above. The first one is the localization target, which you probably know from the localization dashboard in native Unreal. It's the same thing. We also use those. And then the highest hierarchy is the content module that the text lives in. Like I said before, we use plugins, so the different content modules get their own entries, so we can organize our text a little bit better. Yeah, and it's a regular tree view, so you can select things, and on the left you have like more information about the text. You can also enable editing and then directly change stuff in here if you want to. And you can also change stuff in the details panel, of course, like the context or the tags. The tagging system is how we track the state of our local. So I can tag stuff as proofread, for example, and then other people will know that someone's looked into this. Yeah, and here on the left right now, you can see the filter panel. It works similar to how the content browser filters work, that you can have these different buttons that filter for specific things. Like right now, I filtered for all modified texts. So the data shrunk down significantly into those entries where I modified the tags. And you can also filter for the complex filtering that works in the content browser also works right here. So you can filter for a namespace, for example. Yeah, and then at the bottom left, you can see a little localization report where it shows you how the state of the texts, whether they have been reviewed, whether they have been proofread, and the word counts, and whether they've been translated, or the translation percentage. And it also changes depending on what you select in the editor. So it doesn't display only the state of all of the data, but what you currently want to look at. All right. Like I said, the editor is great for like individual edits, but for bulk writing operations, like adding like 200 new entries for a feature or doing a big rewrite pass, it's not great, and our writers fall back to Excel for that, and that's also okay for now. I still want to show you how it works. This one is it. It's basically just one button, and that brings up some export parameters, and then you can select a folder where you want to put them, and you will have some CSV files in this case, and then you can edit them and re-import them, and then your changes will show up. Yeah, and while that video is running and you see me painfully slowly typing again, I want to have a quick tangent to another pain point that we have, which was finding texts in the engine. Just if you imagine testing a build and you see a typo or something that you quickly want to take care of, then you either have to look through a bunch of string tables to find it, or worse, you have to dig through multiple layers of UI blueprints. Or if you want to like clean up the localized data for your localizers to not translate texts that you don't actually use anymore, then there's just no easy way to find out what text is still in use. In general, going from asset to text, like finding the text in any assets was still fine, but then finding all usages of a text wasn't really that great. So that's why we need text referencing, and Unreal already serializes the text references for us if you use string tables. But there's no easy way to search for those references. You can show them in the reference viewer, but all we did is add buttons that actually brings up the reference viewer for the text we're looking for. And we added those buttons to the inline widget, and also here, as you can see, in the localization editor. And I'd argue that this is one of the highest value and lowest effort improvements that you can make, even if you don't adopt anything else from the session. It it looks like this. How you can spawn a reference viewer for text is you can use the text inspector to get the string table ID and key, and then you from the string table reference from the string table registry you can get the string table asset, then turn it into an asset identifier, and then with this delegate at the bottom you can broadcast it and open or draw attention to the reference viewer tab. We've also made a small bug fix to the reference viewer code that it actually refreshes once you reuse one of those tabs. Like I said, the button looks like this, and in the reference viewer it will then show up like this. There's, in this case, 2 assets that reference the texts I was looking for. And that's a massive time save if you're looking for text, because you can just open the localization editor, type in the text that had a typo, click one button, and you will know all of the assets where it's used. Another small but important feature that we wanted to add is being able to reference texts in code, similar to how native gameplay tags work. We can just register texts in the code to make sure they exist in the system. And it's not quite the same as native gameplay tags. They are also defined via macro and used pretty similarly, but we don't actually define all of the data in the code. We just tell the system that a text with this key needs to exist, and the actual data is then set up in the localization editor. But it's very important to have this to be more flexible how we use ftexts. Otherwise, we would have to assign all of the texts in assets, which can be a pain for some things, or you would have to expose them in, like, I don't know, developer settings or something, which is also more effort. For the editor itself, a quick note, we use the custom font because when we support like a ton of languages, the default Unreal font may not be enough, and you might get some glyph errors. So we've expanded some character ranges for our custom font and added some more variants, so we can support every script that we needed. Like, I think Mongolian had a ton of errors. But that's about it, about how we manage texts in the editor. One more important step in that whole thing, and probably my favorite step, is actually the whole validation topic. In native Unreal, you have validation kind of late in the process because it happens during the gathering process. There's a couple checkboxes in the local dashboard you can check or set up, and then it will do validation for you and log the errors. But for us, that is way too late. We want the errors like immediately after you tried to edit the text or tried to add it. So yeah, we want to avoid a long feedback loop. We want to just do it instantly. And here I've prepared some data with some errors in it. And once I hit the save button, it will bring up a new window with a bunch of issues that we have to resolve now. It's probably a bit small on screen, but the first one is a text format argument mismatch, where in the English version we have a format argument called player name, and in the German version it's just called name. So obviously when you try to plug that in, the German version will not be formatted properly unless you use numbered formatting. Then it still works, but it's not a number. So the editor will show you this, and then you can resolve it by directly in here changing the argument back to player name and accepting the change. And the next issue that it found is actually not much of an issue. It's just access whitespace. So here the system will just let you choose what to do. And fortunately, that this is something that can be auto-resolved, so we can just let the system trim the white space. And yeah, the next issue is an error again, where the context of a text was completely empty. And our system checks for some mandatory data that we require all texts to have. For some of them, it's functional, like everything needs to have a non-empty English text, for example, just so it's displayed somehow. And the context is also important, so other developers or translators know what the text is about, or what the intentions of the texts are. And for this one, oops, video reverted. Sorry.
We're about halfway through the bar. It looked like.
Yeah, the empty context is actually an error that will prevent you from saving this text completely. The excess white space is something that you could just ignore for now and save it anyway. But for the errors, we require them to be fixed before you can save this text. And the last one is, the last issues are all warnings. They are about duplicates. So the system has detected texts that share the same English text, and it will tell you about them. This might be something that's intended, like you might have an intended duplicate, so you can also keep the duplicates. The thing is, you just need to choose. You need to either keep both duplicates or merge them into one text. There might just be some texts or some English words that have different translations with different meanings. Yeah, and so the good thing about this whole validation topic is that you can validate everything right here and or resolve it right here in this window, and you don't have to wait for anything else. The data is more or less ensured to be completely valid when it hits the disk. And yeah, that's pretty much it about the validation. Maybe one small note on the ftext, on the format validation errors that I showed before. Unreal has a built-in function to validate text format patterns. The problem about it is that it doesn't actually return any errors, even if there are any in there, which is generally okay if you just want to display the text, and it will just treat everything as a string literal. And then QA can see that it's broken and report it. But in our validation system, we actually want to know those errors. So I've added an engine mod that actually returns errors when the pattern is broken. Yeah. So once all of the text has been validated, it is then saved directly. And the validation errors, or the text is not validated anymore in future validation runs unless you actually change anything in the data. Yeah, so the key step is that we don't separate the validation from the content creation. It's like integrated into the content creation, into the editing workflow, and the issues are caught as early as possible. All right. Since we now have the texts, we want to have them translated. And for this, we support 2 ways to send them to a third party, so to make them available to third parties. One is via the CSV files I showed you already, and the other one is through PO files, which you probably know because they're pretty common in localization. For the PO exporter, we used the one that's available in the engine. We just made some small extensions because it didn't quite support everything that we needed. And for the CSV exporter, we looked at the data table exporter that already exists in the engine. The problem with it is that it is generic for pretty much any use struct, but it has dependencies on data tables, which we don't want. So we took that that exporter as an inspiration and created our own that just doesn't have the data table dependency. And we also changed a couple other things, but that's mainly it. So you can either export these files and then send them out via email or whatever your communication method is with your translators. But what we also want to use is online translation platforms like Crowdin, if you may know them. They just let you upload translation data, and then other users can access your project and just help translating it. And for that, we created an integration into our custom editor, and you can directly from here via a couple button clicks and some configuration upload into Crowdin. As you can see, the file showed up here, and there's one German translation missing, so I'm just quickly gonna add that. Text we want to translate is unavailable. So yeah, this is very convenient because we don't need to actually handle any raw files or anything. We just do everything from the editor and then send the translators a message that we've updated the files on Crowdin, and that they can then use that. From a technical perspective, this is like a separate plugin that uses the translation service framework that Unreal already has. It's not that great. I've had to make a couple modifications to make the Crowdin stuff work within that framework. So in hindsight, it probably would have been better to just ignore that framework and do like just a plugin that just works and do it independently of that framework. The original intention was that if we do it within that framework, we can also use the Crowdin integration without the localization editor. And at the same time, the localization editor can use the generic API of the framework to also interact with other translation services that happen to be there in the engine. The reality of it is, though, that we just will probably never switch up these combinations. We will just use our local system and with Crowdin. So in hindsight, it was maybe not the best choice to do it, but it works. It doesn't hurt us in any way. We just could have kept it simpler.
That's something that happens, right? Like you go in with some ideas of like what you'll need, what the use cases will be, and then once the pipeline kind of settles, maybe you don't use all those initial ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you can see, right, on slide right now, when you download the Crowdin data into the editor again, it will also still run the validation, which is also very important, that any potential mistakes the translators make with not adhering to your text formatting rules, that you can catch those immediately and let them know that they need to take care of this for future texts. And in this case, you can also immediately fix it yourself. So you will never have broken data in your game. All right. Then now our texts have been translated. So we are basically done, right? So I want to show you again how it works internally, like behind the curtains. Already I said before how the native Unreal system works, and what we did is we removed the second step, the gathering step completely. doesn't exist anymore. We go straight from assigning f-texts in the assets to compiling the locres data from it, or from the JSON source files that we have. And then the string table assets, we also don't maintain anymore as developers, but the system dynamically creates them when either the editor starts or the build starts. The reason why we still need those is the text referencing, because our f-texts are linked to the string tables, and we want the string tables to be there so the text referencing works. But that also means as our texts point to string tables, if we don't have the actual string tables created, that it will just show up as a missing string table entry, which we obviously also don't want. Yeah, and then the locres files are just when the build starts loaded, or when you start Pi, they are loaded into the text localization manager, which is then used by the UI. And we have a second path for this, for the game features, which is a bit different because of the dynamic loading and unloading of the data. We still have only f-texts in the assets and in the code. And we also still create string tables, but not on startup anymore. We create them when the game feature activates. And the string tables then just contain the normal English texts. And then we also, when the game feature activates, we load the data into the text localization manager manually using fpolyglot text data, which is Unreal's way of loading dynamic texts at runtime. And then the UI falls back or uses those texts. And when the game feature deactivates, the texts are unregistered and the string tables are cleaned up. So this is how we made sure that we completely dynamically load and unload. Right. Yeah, that's pretty much it. For the game features, maybe it's relevant. All of these things happens within this dedicated game feature action that then developers have to use to make sure to use on their game feature asset data. Otherwise, we've also run into some troubles where people didn't do that and were complaining that localization was broken, but it was just not there yet. The game feature action was just not there yet, and this is also something we want to improve in the future, that developers don't have to think of that, and it's just there automatically, but it's not there yet. Right. So now we've basically followed the text through, from creation through editing and validation and export, translation, and now also import and the runtime loading, and basically on every step the system enforces the rules that we've set, and we keep the data in that one place. But now I've mentioned it before already, but we have data that is a bit more complex than just text, which is the voice lines. So so far everything was what I call pure UI texts, but the voice lines obviously need to be also displayed in the UI, but I also add as subtitles, but I also have different purpose, and they also have a lot more data, like they have a speaker role, for example, or they can have recipient roles, or they have recording directions or whatever, and they can have multiple fragments if you have if you want to split up one sentence for performance purposes or something. Yeah, and we of course could try to cram all of these things into the text system itself again, but then we would just pollute that data, and we would make the editing experience for text just worse. So what we wanted is a clear separation before a clear separation of the different types of localized data we have in the projects, with an option to also have dedicated UI, but it should still be plugged into the same editor infrastructure, so people don't have to learn to use 3 different tools or something. And we also want to use the same validation pipeline, just with a little bit different validators. So yeah, maybe before I go further, quickly something to avoid confusion. When I say voice line system, I'm talking about like the data layer that stores and manages the data. I'm specifically not talking about like a dialogue system with like selection logic and things like that. Since we are working on multiple different projects in parallel at Aesir, we've separated those 2 layers, and the voice line system provides the data, and that voice line system is shared across the projects. But then each project has their own dialogue system that consumes the data and implements the logic for selecting which voice lines are played and when they're played. This separation does have one UX cost that I will come back to at the end, but it was just necessary because we couldn't unify all of the different dialogue systems because of the different needs of the projects. Yeah. So the technical setup is pretty straightforward. That the localization editor just allows registering different extensions, and the editor itself just controls the layout and hosts the extensions. And the extensions then provide the UI and manage the data of the data that we want to localize. And any plugin can implement a new extension and then register it, and it will show up as a separate tab. Yeah, and let's see how that looks. So we can see a separate voice lines tab here, and it looks pretty similar actually because the systems share a lot of UI. They could share more, but that is a different task in my backlog. And you can see right now in the details panel, maybe it's a bit small, but there's more data there. There's a speaker, there's voice lines, and you have a clear separation between the data. So you can also add new functionality.
I am Batutzun, keeper of maps, at your service.
Right here, you can play back all of the different voiceover assets from the editor if they have one yet, if they're not translated or if they're not localized yet, then of course it will actually fall back to text to speech and will sound very ugly. But yeah, a lot of the functionality is shared between them, between the extensions of the texts and the voice lines. For voice lines, another additional feature is browsing to the assets directly. So I've selected a voice line in the editor, and when I click the button, I can directly in the content browser see what the sound asset is. Yeah, validation pretty much works the same way as it was with the texts. We just have different validators registered with the system that check voice line specific rules, things like whether the speaker is set or whether any fragments are empty. But they all plug into the same system, and you can resolve them in the same way. Yeah. All right. So for voice lines, we've also customized the UX a bit further. We've added support for the sequencer, so the projects can directly interact with the sequencer from the localization editor and create dialogue assets, basically, that play back the voice lines, and they give you camera cuts depending on the length of the voice line, and things are nice and quick. And also on the bottom, you can see details customization or property customization for voice lines, where you can, it looks similar to how the text widget looks, just has a couple more fields. And it works in a very similar way. You can filter for different speakers different namespaces and keys, and then this way select whatever you are searching for. Yeah, but the stream is not about voice lines. It's the main point is that we now have like full control of whatever we want to localize, and if we decide to localize, for example, achievements for some reason, if we want to separate those texts out of the regular texts and turn them into something dedicated, then we would be easily able to do this, and it wouldn't be a big hassle. We could just create a new extension, build some custom UI for it, and then it's done. Right. That's pretty much most of what I have to say already. The next step would be what works and what doesn't work, basically. One problem we had is access to this tool, because it is just in Unreal, only in the editor. So if you don't have access to the Perforce depot, you just cannot see the localization state. And you have to ask someone that has access and need them to open the editor and then give you that information. Especially for bigger projects, it can also be a little bit annoying that if the startup time of the editor becomes a bit long, and you're a writer and you just want to change one text, that can also be a bit annoying. So it's like a double-edged sword. On one hand, we want people to get the information quickly, but on the other hand, restricting everything to in-editor usage it prevents so many possible errors that could be made or mistakes that could happen, and we don't have to maintain any tools outside of the engine. So yeah, the solution for quick information access is obviously something like CI pipelines that generate some reports about the current state and just publish them somewhere where everyone can see them. We haven't built that yet, but we plan to. It's not super high on the prior list, to be honest. Right. Next problem is, like I've mentioned already, the lacking writing experience inside the localization editor. It's good for reviewing and editing, but it's not great for writing, or for bulk writing, for doing like a lot of changes. I already showed you the CSV file workaround, and we are generally looking into improving the UX by adding new small features like search and replace stuff, or also generally listening to feedback of our writers. But it will just be a significant chunk of work to fully get our writers into that editor. But the advantage now is that we have absolute full control over how we want to extend the system and what we want to do in there. And it is relatively easy to add things like the sequence extension I just showed you. Yeah. Then, as you may have noticed in the voice line section, the tree layout is the voice lines are a bit disconnected. Like usually, they are connected to by some sequences or with branching or whatever. So displaying them as flat data and only organized by like naming conventions and keys is not that great. So yeah, we somehow want to visualize those relationships between the different voice lines, and this is a direct consequence of us splitting the voice line layer from the dialogue layer. And I'm not quite sure yet how we want to resolve it, but it's something that we want to look into. Last topic, and maybe the most important one from that list here, is that we don't have good tooling yet to find texts that completely escape the system. So if a text links to like a legacy string table asset, or if a text property has localization completely disabled, we don't have an easy way to detect it. We rely on QA to play the build, for example, with the leetify unlocalized flag, to find those texts. but that's time consuming, and we want to build something that can find those things earlier and surface them latest during cooking, ideally earlier. And some other things that we are looking into, but we're not quite sure yet how far we go in all of these topics is the first one is the validation system is still relatively new. And besides some visual improvements, we also want to have more things that validate our data. For example, the engine has rich text validation built in. We haven't adopted it yet. It's just something that has to be done. But there's also, we want to have as much validation as possible, so there can be as little problems as possible. And the most ambitious item on the list is probably turning the localization editor into a standalone program, similar to something like Unreal Insights. It's gonna be a ton of work if we decide to do this, but it would resolve our access problem, and it would also open the door to editing localization data in builds, for example, which could be useful for even faster iteration times. Like if you're a writer and want to fix a typo in a build that you just spotted, then you could just do it right there instead of having to go back to the editor. And last topic is a bit of a divisive one, but there would be a lot of options for LLM integration, like suggesting context descriptions, reviewing texts for consistency, or like having bulk editing also if you want to change something. There's a lot of places where language models could support the workflow of the writers. But as you all know, the generative AI topic is very divisive, and we want to make sure that we act responsibly and just take a clear stance on how we want to handle all of these before we stray too far. So this is the LLM integration is a big maybe if we want to actually do this. All right, it's time to wrap up. So what I showed you is how we went from localization being more of an afterthought to integrating it into the content pipeline from the very start of a project, and no one can do anything about it. No one can escape the system. And so far we've shipped one project with this system, and more active projects are using it at the moment. Reception by the dev team was pretty good. Obviously, there's still a bunch of issues that we want to resolve, and plenty of areas for improvement. And I also know that not everyone has the resources to build something extensive like this, but I hope you at least found some patterns worth adopting. I'll say it again. I think the ability to find text references is extremely helpful, and it dramatically reduces the time you need for searching for texts. And every time someone asks, do we still need this text? You immediately have the answer within 2 clicks. And also make sure to validate your data. Do it as early as possible. And also do it when we're not talking about localization. Everything should be validated. As much as possible should be validated. It's always painful when you have to fix things afterwards, after you have forgotten about the context already. Right. Most importantly, just think about localization early, before the mess starts. And if you set up your localization infrastructure at the beginning of the projects where there's like 20 texts instead of 20,000, it never becomes a problem. And it just becomes a part of how your team works. That's it for me.
Awesome.
I've put all the QR codes here on this slide, so you can take a screenshot now. My contact information is also there. If you have any questions or want to ask anything or discuss anything in more detail, you can reach out. And now we also have time for some Q&A, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna keep this full screen for a moment so folks can hopefully get a clear view of it to grab these. We are gonna move to Q&A now, and we have a little bit of actually a fair bit of time for some Q&A. So I want to get to as many questions as possible. So if you have any questions for Philipp here about this localization tools that they've created, or anything related to this topic, localization in general, anything like that, please put them into the chat. Put it in brackets question followed by the question, and we'll gather as many of those as we can and throw them his way. With that, while a few of these come in, I actually had a couple questions for you right out
Sure.
of the bat. The main one is this feels like a fairly robust tool. Like looking at this, it's not like an insignificant amount of additions and tool set that you did here. How much of this was like you knew going in what you were going to add, and how much of this came over time with more requests from different teams or what have you?
Yeah, we planned out the majority of how we want the data to flow, and most of the editing experience itself came at a later point. We had a rough sketch for the editing experience that we wanted to do, and after some discussions with people in the company, like writers or also content creators, like coders, tech artists that make the UI, I just gathered a lot of the information, and then we made a plan from that. But we changed plenty of things later on in the process. It was a long process.
Yeah, so clarify that. A lot of it you were kind of implementing kind of like on paper essentially at first, and then getting feedback before actually starting to build into the code.
No, we were actually just going
straight in.
right in,
Okay.
straight in, making the tool, and then getting feedback on the first versions, and then we rolled it out once it was relatively stable for the one project that already shipped with it. And from then on, I was just in contact with the people using it and made continuous improvements. Like the validation system, for example, is one thing that we added based on the feedback I got from our writers, and also just things I noticed when I was looking at the localization data of that project. So I was just checking in intervals to see how it was going there, and added things based on what I thought made sense. But the clear separation between the content creator workflow in UMG and handling that, and then the other side being a writer and having the localization editor, that was all planned before and done or implemented before it was shipped to a project.
And the very inception of these tools, and you may have stated this already, and if you did, I missed it. I apologize. But the very inception of these tools happened mid-project. You're like, hey, we have this thing. We need to solve this.
Yeah, it took a while to. Well, okay, so we're basically always mid-project in every
Sure.
phase because we have parallel projects, right?
Right.
So there were running projects that there was a running project that did not get the localization system anymore. They were stuck to the old system. But yeah, for the one project that was the first one, we just decided it's worth it to use it, to roll it out to that project. We want that benefit on it. And there was just one time where we decided it's good enough now. It's not perfect or anything, but it will give us a benefit. So we rolled it out to that project.
Very cool. Very cool. We're getting a bunch of questions in here. I also just wanted to shout out too, while you were giving your presentation, there was many people in chat communicating back and forth about many different implementations for their own use cases and things like that. And it was a cool conversation to see. Appreciate the folks in chat helping each other out. That's what we do this for, right? We're sharing our information with you folks, and seeing you folks share it with each other is also super, super cool. We can jump into the questions here though. This one was, would you feel it's better to handle localization with C++ coding, or do you think Blueprints would be able to handle the same sort of scope for this sort of tool? It sounds like yours was mostly, if not all, C++, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the implementation of the tool is all C++.
Right.
there are just certain things that you just need C++ for in the engine, because the things are not exposed to blueprints. I'm not sure if you can actually do stuff like registering polyglot texts at runtime within blueprints. I'm not entirely sure. Since this is, most of our tools are not created within blueprints, except if it's like an editor utility widget or something that is obviously a blueprint. And you can also build the UI for the tools in UMG, but I've used Slate in so much in my career that I just am very comfortable with it. So I just use it. It's fast for me to write it, and so that part is kind of was not that hard, and it's just for the in-depth stuff you just need C++, and there's also a bunch of engine modifications that we've done. So
yeah, with blueprints, you can do quite a lot in Blueprint, but not everything. So if you're more comfortable working in Blueprint, see what you can accomplish with that, and then once you reach the limit of that, then do some C++ scripting to kind of fill those gaps.
In my experience, blueprints are great for smaller tooling and individual small tools that do one thing, but for a big tool like this, C++ was better for us.
I got a pretty technical question here for you that may or may not apply. Does this tool use the 16-bit W_T to support languages with non-English alphabets, such as Chinese? Does it have a way to encode languages written from right to left, such as Arabic, Hebrew, etc.?
It does not support writing from left to right or anything right now in that direction. I wasn't sure about the standard. I didn't quite get that. I'm not the most versed in the whole language standards and what people need to use there. That's mostly on the project's side. But no, it does not support writing right to left right now.
Yeah. Another question we had here is, where the translation doesn't have one, as long as you have something typed in there like no translation, it should save properly, correct?
Yeah, correct. I mean, you can, same for the context, you can also write in there no context and it will save perfectly fine. Yeah, it's not the greatest practice to do so, because it's kind of garbage data, but I will not stop you.
Yeah. Another one we had here is how are the lines of text exported and imported to the file, which can be emailed to non-technical translator? The file format translation needs to support then back to that 16-bit W_T sets. So I'm assuming maybe like a CSV or something like that to kind of communicate between.
Yeah, we have CSV and PO files, the CSV and PO format that we support. Like I said, for PO, we just use the built-in PO exporter that exists in the engine with some modifications that you can see in the pull request. And for the CSV exporter, we used the data table exporter as a base, basically, to then change it, remove the data table dependency, and export the data to CSV.
Right. Another question we had here is, what is the easiest mistake to make? What is the easiest mistake to make when doing localization, but one of the easiest to correct if caught right away? Or if you have any other examples that you might have.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's very tempting to just hard code the texts in the blueprints and not put them in string tables, because it's just very convenient to just type it in the text field and have Unreal auto-generate the namespace and the key. And then just don't care about it anymore. The problem is, if you do it too much, you will never get like a clear state of your localization. I would suggest, if you're not writing any tooling, at least put stuff in string tables, even if it is annoying, because then at least you can only look at your string tables and infer the state from there. But if you're just hard coding everything in blueprints or just mixing everything, all the different approaches, then it's just extremely hard to know what the state of your localization is. You don't know if everything's translated. You don't know if anything is not localized. You have to guess. There's also not I guess when in the gathering step, Unreal will give you a word count, for example, for the whole project. But to get word counts of like a specific feature or something, you have to do a more involved setup where you are only gathering from certain assets or something. So it can be a lot more work depending on the information that your outsourcers require from you. Especially if you're doing multiple, like if you're localizing in batches, which we usually do, is we don't localize the entire game in one run. We do like an initial run with part of the data, so we already have something localized, and then do more iterations on that data and then give them new data sets. So yeah.
We have one question that kind of follows up from that previous one, or your response to that one is if they were doing the data table option for that, or the string tables, I'm sorry, for that, what kind of data types would you suggest they use in that instance?
Well, for string tables, you can only use strings, right? So right. I'm not sure if I get the question.
Yeah, it just says what kind of data types would you suggest for string tables? So maybe in terms of communicating between the string table and
I mean, sure. you still have to use ftext to in your asset then to link to that string table, but yeah, you can't do much. It's another disadvantage of the string table, actually, that you can't give anything like context or something. You just have a namespace, a key, and then the actual text, but that's all the information you have. You cannot tag anything. Actually, the string table system in the background would support metadata, but the asset just doesn't expose that support.
Yeah. If you're still in the chat and you if we didn't understand the question properly, let us know and we'll revisit that one.
Yeah.
This one, it was probably a pretty simple answer for this, but we'll throw it at you anyways. With localizing a horror indie game, is it worth localizing a horror indie game early, or should it be done after the core development?
I don't think the genre has anything to do with when you should localize. In my opinion, you should always consider localization first. It's also fine. Like, you don't have to write one text and then immediately send it out to your localizers, right? The localization part itself can happen at the end of the project, like whenever you hit a point in time where you say, okay, I'm done with all of the writing. But you should, from the start, think about localization, think about the setup that you want to do, so you can make sure when you end up in that spot of getting your text localized, that you don't have to deal with the mess I described.
Yeah. For really to be clear for that is, it's like you don't have to actually do the act of localizing the words early on necessarily, but make sure you're building foundations so that way when you do that, it's a simple process and you don't have to go back and sift through countless layers of things and maybe even unintentionally undo work in order to implement those sorts of localization changes. Awesome. Another question we had here is, can you talk a little bit about the performance impact of runtime loading of localization files?
We've not done that much profiling in that regard. We usually run with the approach of we do performance optimizations when we run into the problems, basically when we notice it's getting worse, and then we investigate and tackle the big things first. And localization has not been a problem yet. Obviously, there is a loading overhead for registering the text and unregistering the text when a game feature loads. On the other hand, you have like a memory benefit because you're not loading all of the text at once for all of your features, even if they're not active at the moment. So it's always a trade-off, right? For Switch, you might want less memory, even if it's not that much of an impact. So far, I've not heard anything from the project teams, since they mostly do the optimizations, that it's a problem. I can imagine it might be a problem at some point, but we'll fix it when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think it completely depends on the amount, right, of data you're loading and
absolutely.
unloading. And like text itself is fairly small, so I imagine you'd have to have a pretty robust thing loading in to have any straight up issue with the text itself. But things like voice lines and stuff like that, that could be a heavier cost.
Yeah, but that's also mostly on the assets themselves and less on the text of the voice lines.
Right.
And those assets, if they're in a game feature, they will be loaded when the game feature is loaded, no matter what. Our system doesn't really change anything about that.
Yeah. Another question we had here is how much more efficient do you feel like your localization was after this custom tooling versus the default UE5 workflow?
Yeah. For the content creator side, like adding a new text to a widget, it's a small improvement relatively because the overhead in general wasn't that big. The main benefit there we get is that it's just a very clean setup now, and we will not run into the mess. That is the main problem. We avoid the mess. That's the main thing. So it's not really a speed benefit on a daily basis. It's more like a speed benefit on like we avoid having the risk at the end of the project that there's going to be a massive 1 week chaos thing where we need to take care of localization. For the writing experience, on the other hand, I think it is a decent bit faster because the rules are clear. You don't have to handle any Excel scripts that we had before. You don't need to learn that much about how the system works. You just write it in a CSV file, import it, and you're done. And the writing process itself, like writing it in the CSV file, is obviously the same no matter what.
Yeah, and sometimes the benefit doesn't have to be efficiency, right? In terms of like speed, it could be efficiency in terms of just like keeping it simple so that implementation is easier, or it just has less roadblocks or any sort of thing like that.
Absolutely, and that's the main point that we want to improve. It's obviously writing faster is nice, but there's not that much that you can improve already. There's so many tools that let you write fast. It's mainly that the management of the data is significantly easier, like by a huge amount.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Another question we had for you is any advice for folks looking to implement their own tooling for localization?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what resources you have available. If you're a smaller team, I would suggest just getting together, talking to each other, how you want to do it, how you want to handle localization, and then making sure you stick to that rule, maybe via some smaller data validation things or extending the string table class somehow and doing like an automated CSV export there or something. I would suggest there, if you don't have that many resources, focus on the small things. Don't go for like a massive tool like this one. If you're a bigger team on your project, I would suggest that you take a look into having a larger tool like this to make sure people don't have to follow the rules, because the more people are involved, the more likely it is that someone forgets something or just doesn't stick to the rules. And yeah, also if you have a smaller game, it might also just not be worth it to invest that much time for it. The answer, to be honest, is just very much it depends.
Yeah, that is like the most common answer for so many things, right? Because it does. There's so many. There's countless variables for any system, and it really just depends on your use case, right? Well, we are getting close to the bottom of the list here. So if anybody else has any other questions for Philipp, please put them into the chat. Remember to put in brackets question followed by your question, and we'll gather through these. I do have a couple more for you while we wait for those to come in, though. And one actually just piggybacks off of what we just talked about there. That was some tool or some advice for those who are looking to implement some custom tool set. Do you have any advice outside of tooling for folks who are going to be handling any sort of localization aspect of their project?
Ooh, in what regard to localization?
Anything you think that is important to know? Anything that just comes top of the mind? We can also circle back to it if you need a second to think about it, because I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, there's just so many things that make sure everyone knows the rules of like how text formatting works and what the restrictions of text formatting are in Unreal. That you, for example, shouldn't like join localized texts together because that can mess up even though it works in English, it may not work in other languages. So yeah. Localization is a massive topic, and there's just so many things to consider.
Absolutely. Another question for you, and this is always the super fun one, which is if you could go back to the beginning of this process and start the whole tool over again, what were some things you would tell yourself or the team, or just changes you'd implement to, like, I don't know, streamline the process, save some headaches, maybe some foundational things? I know you mentioned there at the very end a few things that are still kind of ongoing issues, maybe planning ahead for things like that. Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's always some things that go how you want them to go, and how some that don't go that way, right? I am relatively happy with the general architecture of the system. I've not had to do like any changes, basically. The whole thing with the crowd-in integration I mentioned and how texts are exported, I've had to do a fair bit of iteration on that whole process, especially how the UX of that works. I would probably take more time at the start to figure out exactly how people want the UX to be and what the main concerns are, and then get more information at the start. But otherwise, I think, it just goes. It is how it is. With all big features, you do something at the start, and then sometimes at some point you notice that it doesn't exactly do what you wanted to do, and then you iterate on it, and then it works sometimes. It works out sometimes, and sometimes you need to iterate more.
Yeah. Another question we had here was, how do you prevent overwriting or losing translations when updating source text?
So there's two options that we have. Is if we change a source text, that either it completely wipes all of the translations, and the text basically has to be retranslated. And of course, some of the tags, like the proofread tags or the validated stuff, or all of these things, they get reset to, and it's basically a completely new text. Another option is that the existing translations remain there, and we just flag it as, hey, this translation might be outdated, please have a look at it again. And that's how we handle it.
Awesome. We have a follow-up to the previous question we had before, which is to follow up on my previously incorrectly worded question regarding string tables / data tables. Can you please do a bit more extrapolation on storage systems that are better suited for the type of localization you're referring to? I assume that means of storage of the different kinds of data types.
Yeah, we've actually not restricted our teams in any kind where they can use ftext. So everything's based on ftext as usually in Unreal, right? You can use it in any blueprint, in any widget, in data assets, in code still, like I showed. We've not changed anything there. You still can have all of these options. It's just that we manage the data in a different way, so we don't run into the problems that you would usually get because the data is spread out over so many assets. So we've eliminated that problem arising from this scattering via a different issue. We don't actually restrict the scattering of the data. That would also be something we want to avoid, because we don't want to restrict how people work with their assets. We don't want to force them to make like a separate asset type just to add texts. That then we're back at the original string table approach. We just, it's more inefficiencies that get introduced that way.
Yeah, makes complete sense to me. Well, Philipp, thank you so much for not only putting together this presentation, but also coming on to give it to us and talk about these tools and some of the learnings and findings from this whole process.
Thanks for having me.
This was awesome. Super appreciate you coming on and taking the time to do that. Do you have any other things you want to talk to the chat about? Any other final notes or anything while we have you here?
I think we're good. Reach out if you have any more questions. I'm available on LinkedIn for contact. Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. And then what I'll do, folks, is I'll actually go back up to the links, the QR codes here once we close out, and hold on that for a little bit. So if you haven't had a chance to get those yet, you'll be able to do that now here at the very end. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and a huge shout out to everybody in the audience as well. This show would not be what it is without you, your time, and your questions. And if any of you came partway through the stream and wanted to rewatch a section, no worries. We post all of our streams in video format that can be viewed on demand on both our Twitch and YouTube channel at Unreal Engine. You can also keep up with the latest news, shoutouts, and other cool information on all of our socials at Unreal Engine. And if you haven't already, come join us on the EDC, the Epic Developer Community, where we have all of our documentation, tutorials from both the community and Epic staff alike, forums, and much more. But with that, huge shout out again to you, Philipp. Thank you so much. And we will see you all on the next Inside Unreal. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.